we're essentially dropping our judgment. And we're dropping our judgment because the basis on which judgment is coming in. So we can go back to it just is. And in doing that, we essentially are being shown that there is this place outside of judgment. That in the instant that the judgment, oh, this is not good enough, I didn't do good enough, you didn't do good enough. As soon as that gets cut off by, oh, it is what it is. And so in teachings, we sometimes hear, life is unfolding exactly as it's meant to. Now that concept is a concept we get given essentially to say, don't have an idea about life because life is unfolding in each exactly as it's meant to. It's simply a concept that is designed to interfere, not to say that it's actually not, that it's inaccurate, but it's there, that's pointed out. There's plenty of other things in life that aren't pointed out in spiritual teachings because they're not relevant. This is pointed out because it's relevant to bring an end to that thinking that says, oh, it should be different. And when we find ourselves resting in what is, you could say, and if we're resting in what is, it means we're one with life. The separation, the resistance is all that creates separation. And for a while, that resting in what is requires the biological reaction and any thinking to be kept at bay. Because if that doesn't happen, the remnants of the attachment keep jumping in. So that's why we're told just be with what is. And the implication is just be still. Don't think. Just be one with, no thinking, maybe no movement, even just sit down and just be. And in time, we'll find that this being can be there even when we say to someone, hey, that's a really bad result. Why are you digging the hole there when I asked you to dig it over there? Because once we're grounded and I say, but why are you digging the hole there when I asked you to dig it over there? Then that movement is a discernment. And deep down, there is an understanding that that's life unfolding. My point is life unfolding. And attitudinally, there isn't the attitude, it should be different. Now, what we often assume incorrectly is that, if there's this attitude that it shouldn't be different, if that's deeply ingrained, then you won't say anything about the hole. Someone's digging it in the wrong spot. And you walk past and you see it and you just smile and carry on. I think that's not practical daily living. I mean, when someone's digging the hole in the wrong spot and you've asked them to dig it somewhere else, you go past, biologically, you're going to go, why are you digging the hole there? And it can, from outside, someone will say, oh, he's in resistance with what is. But there's two layers. There's the biological, and it could even be the biological anger. Like, why are you digging the hole there? I told you to dig it there. Don't you listen? And I know it's hard to understand. And then deep down, it's like, this is all unfolding perfectly. I know it was destiny for the hole to be dug there, not where I had intended it to be dug. And it was destiny for the biological reaction to be like that. And the biological reaction doesn't include uncomfortableness in it. Unless the attachment to outcome is there, and then the attachment to outcome jumps in. And then there is the uncomfortableness in it. So we can then, when this attachment to outcome has fallen away, we can start discerning things, and we can say, even you get, this becomes even trickier still. If I say, you could say that someone is doing something quite stupid. Now, because of how the word stupid is usually used by us, and when we have attachment to outcome, when you say stupid to someone, unless these dynamics have fallen away, it has to have judgment in it. When the doership has fallen away, you can call someone someone's action stupid. I go, that's really stupid. You've got a can of petrol there, open, big can of petrol, and you're lighting a match. That's stupid. It is stupid, just as a discernment, no judgment. Discernment. Match, petrol can, stupid. If someone says, no, stupid is a judgment, I say, well, it's all dependent on your internal attitude towards the circumstance and what the word means. I'm not saying the person is the doer. I'm just looking at the circumstance, and it's sort of, it's like, if you see a rock on the edge of a cliff and it's being held by a little pebble, you look at it and you can discern, and you can use a word that describes that. And that's discernment. As long as you don't think that the situation has to be different or should be different, then attitude. Anyway, these are things you have to sort of feel yourself. But to understand that you can discern without judging, and that is only going to happen if the attachment to outcome has fallen away, is very important, because if we've gone through a process that says there is no such thing as pleasure or pain, there is no such thing as good or bad, there is no such thing as stupid or not stupid, there's just what is, then we might find that that faculty of discernment has been disabled for good reason, but at some point it needs to come back. Otherwise, we are not functioning in a practical way, because what will happen is we won't then point out things that could be pointed out without judgment. So, it's like, does acceptance mean walking past a man or woman that's lying on the side of the street with a broken leg, where you go, oh, it is what it is. It's all God's will. Now, clearly not. That's not what it means. Destiny, you can accept that life is unfolding. So you see this, and on a deep level, you understand life is always a mix of pleasure or pain. It can be painful for you to see this situation. It's painful for them. And attitudinally, you are in acceptance with the situation, and that doesn't at all prevent you from asking, lifting them up off the ground, helping them sit down. And so if we think that acceptance or being what it is meant no biological reaction, no discernment, we would, by default, that means walking past the man on the street or the woman on the street who has fallen and broken their leg, is in pain, needs help, because we, are accepted. It is what it is. And so it is what it is doesn't prevent us from being part of and interacting on a circumstantial level with what is. Oh, well, I think that about does that subject for today. So we'll see if there's any questions. Hello, Holger.
Hello, Roger. I'm just listening to you, and I enjoy it, but I cannot do anything with it. I mean, it totally resonates in me, but there's no impulse, there's no question or nothing. I'm just hearing you and say yes, and I feel very good right now, but there's still an uncomfortableness inside, as if I would need to come up with some smart question or some smart description or something. But I'm just here, and thank you.
You're very welcome. I don't need you to come up with a smart question.
No, but it's just this itch inside, like this. Maybe this is part of the deep uncomfortableness, the need to describe or justify.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the last few days, I felt a little gray inside. I mean, like a little dull, or I don't know how to describe it. But on another level, I'm super happy and everything is okay. I mean, it's just kind of crazy, but it's totally normal and feels very good.
Mm-hmm.
It just
so
doesn't even make sense to talk about it.
No, I agree. I think when you come on and say, "Look, I have no question," it's a good sign. I was just going to ask, when you find yourself feeling down, is there something inside of you that sort of says, this is one of the colors of life?
Yeah, but I'm still wanting then to look what it is. I mean, there's this. I have a hard time just to surrender then.
But maybe you can sort of look at what it is in the same way as we might help the man or woman with the broken leg, which is, I'm interested to know what it is, but also surrendered to the fact that the uncomfortableness is here.
Yes. Thank you. And I see there are now 3 other people waiting, and I just really enjoy your sharing and your generosity and your creativity. And
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
I appreciate you dropping in. It's very nice to talk with you.
Thank you, Roger.
Hello, Andrea.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you for your teachings. I feel sometimes that I'm hearing myself. You have really, really helped me tremendously. My life has changed so much since I started listening to you. It's like a 360 change. So I am forever, forever grateful to you.
Nice to hear. Great.
I have 2 questions. I find myself listening to your satsangs many, many hours a day, and contemplating on this. It's pretty much what I do all day, or what I want to do all day. I enjoy it, but I don't know when I'm using this teaching as maybe a way of avoiding uncomfortableness, like how to discern between a real investigation and another investigation where it's being used to not feel uncomfortableness. Like, how do I know what, like, yeah. One question.
One phenomenon that I've noticed that applies to your question is that in the process, techniques will always stop working if we're using them as a technique or when they've come to their appropriate use by date. So I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't doubt it until it stops being effective. And so so you'll know when it's if it's being used as a technique. So if it's being used as a technique, eventually a technique will stop being effective. And then that's the sign that shows us, oh, this is now I'm just trying to throw something at the suffering. And until it stops being effective, then it's probably a useful inclusion in the process.
All right, thank you. And another question is, I don't know if it's what's the difference between duality and dualism? You have used that term before.
I have used that term before. It's you're asking that question because you've heard me say it, or because you've seen it somewhere else?
Well, yeah, I was writing on it, and then I got stuck on it, and then I went online and looked it up. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, in the context which I use it, so I'm sure that, often I use words in a specific context, which may not be what the dictionary context is. So in the context of seeking, or at least in this teaching, dualism would refer to attachment to outcomes, where we see pleasure or pain, or good or bad, and we are judging it. We label judge. Duality is the nature of life on a certain level. So, in fact, your question is very much in line with what today's talk is. Daily living on an experience level is duality. There is good tasting food, not good tasting food, not relative to your labeling of it, but actually relative to the biological preference of the body. And so an easier way of getting our mind around that is, if you put your finger in a vice and start tightening it, there is going to be physical pain. You don't need to label it as physical pain. It's in the experience as physical pain. And if you eat something nice, it's physical pleasure. So the inherent nature of the flow of life includes pleasure or pain relative to the biological preferences, which are not the labeling of something as pleasure or pain. The preference will be, the experience will be there, whether you label it or not. And so duality refers to exactly that the flow of life is a mix of pleasure or pain, is good and bad relative to certain benchmarks. And dualism is where we take the inherent duality and turn it into a should be or shouldn't be.
Okay.
So another way is to say that peace of mind is the end of dualism. Peace of mind is the end of dualism, but not the end of duality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard you say that before, and it resonated, but then I forgot, and I wanted to write on it. And yeah, thank you so much. You really are so important. Your teachings are so important in my life. You have no idea the help that you have brought to my life. I am beyond grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Very nice to hear from you. Hello, Peter.
Hi. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Yeah, so I guess my question today is related to the notion of authenticity. It doesn't necessarily relate to the current topic of discussion, but I guess I heard a YouTube video about that. And if I'm not mistaken, the relationship or the notion of authenticity is connected to, well, attachment to outcomes in the sense that we behave in certain ways, or we adopt certain strategies, I guess, to avoid certain outcomes, painful outcomes. And therefore we sort of are not acting in an authentic way because we're acting in acting in a way to avoid a certain outcome as opposed to acting in a way of feeling. And I guess that sort of relates to, shoulds and shouldn'ts. So I guess my question is how do you, I guess I'm trying to hone in on the difference between, or acting, the difference between acting through feeling and then acting through, your notions of shoulds and shouldn'ts. Just because I guess in my experience, and perhaps because I think I've acted in many ways from a place of should and shouldn'ts, that I have a hard time even knowing what I'm feeling. Even figuring out what that is. And sometimes it's very, it becomes very entangled in also other people's feelings. And often I find I will simply sort of go along with other people's feelings or their desires because it's sort of stronger than my belief one way or the other. I don't know. I wonder if you have any sort of tips or things to look out for, I guess.
Yeah. I guess it is one of these areas that you sort of have to jump into, and it develops and we start to see the different ways where we are not being authentic, where we're doing what the other wants, where we're doing what the other wants because we're afraid of not doing it. And so just becoming aware of the fact that this is a really important topic because it's one of the ways that the beliefs change by our behaviors starting to get interfered with, certain behaviors that are coming from the beliefs of doership and attachment. As those behaviors get interfered with, that interference is actually weakening the belief, because the alternative is where the behavior just keeps repeating itself, and every time it repeats itself, we're essentially saying this is the best behavior, which is basically saying the belief at its root is true. Every time it gets interfered with, there's a movement in the body that's saying, hey, this is not authentic, this is not true, which is really saying the belief at the core is not true. So one movement is essentially feeding and fueling and reasserting the belief. The other is dislodging it and unplugging power from it, let's say. So it's a really important area. And it is something that you need to sort of go in and explore yourself, but there are tips for sure. There's probably a couple of, there are some satsangs earlier on. I guess it would be labeled in each moment, do exactly what you think or feel to do, or doing what you feel like, something like that would be the label of the satsangs. There'd be at least 3 or 4 of them that spend the whole satsang talking about the importance of dropping into and changing, finding the courage to do things differently. So one of the easiest ways, I guess, is to go and try and search for those satsangs. But I will say some more about it here because it's a really important topic. First thing is, when you said, we have a strategy of how to get pleasure coming from our shoulds and shouldn'ts, which interferes with doing what we feel like. I think that's what you had said. That's true, but it also makes it sound as if I do what I feel like, then I'm going to get painful consequences, because I think you had said, we'll do what we should in order to avoid painful consequences.
Yeah.
Now, so dropping out of the shoulds and shouldn'ts isn't at all necessarily going to mean you're going to get painful consequences. What is important to see is that in the shoulds and shouldn'ts, what is being prioritized is a certain set of consequences, which essentially is love of the other, love from the other. And a lot of that love from the other, and what we think will give us love for the other, what we think might deliver the absence of love from the other or anger from the other, a lot of that is just a psychological imagination that when we actually withdraw from that movement, we find the outcome is not what we imagined it would be. In fact, we can start finding that the outcome is much better than we expected, to the point that it's better than it was before. That's the whole point, is that we find that in moving from what we should and shouldn't do to what we feel like doing, we start getting a feedback in our own experience that says, oh, this is such a relief, that we then are encouraged to do more and more, to follow the same principle in sort of what seemed like originally would seem like undoable, or areas where we just simply couldn't do it differently. And surprisingly, after a while, those areas become areas that we feel like, I have to make a change in these areas because I've made a change in all the other areas and it's been so positive. So eventually, that area that seemed like it would never change is the one that we're facing, and the change will then happen effortlessly.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's yeah. Well, no, I was just asking that's very relevant, especially the idea of love from the other, or that attachment to that, especially, and I'm wondering, is that also, the same dynamic at play in sort of more mundane matters, I guess, like, like, I don't know, doing your taxes, or let's say like certain career, certain things you have to do for a job or to make money, for example. And I guess I'm always trying to sort of steer things in a direction that's more, I guess, pleasurable at the end of the day. And I guess I'm still having a hard time discerning between feeling and pleasure. Because like doing what you feel seems to me like there's a certain pleasure associated with feeling as well, but maybe I'm misconstruing those two ideas. So you have to, anyway, maybe this isn't that important, but maybe it's more just an intellectual curiosity, but like again, your attachment to outcomes, you do your taxes because you don't want to get, pursued by the government. You do a certain job that you don't really feel like doing because you need money to, that's a more mundane matter. But I don't know, I guess, yeah.
It's a good question. I've got some pointers here. So you can start looking at, okay, so your taxes, for example, as if you've got a month to go, and you've said, oh, I'm going to do my taxes on Sunday.
Yeah.
And you've set that in as that's what I should do. That's what I'm going to do. It's a plan following how I should and shouldn't live life, essentially, where we're not really saying, well, actually, I don't know whether Sunday is the day for my taxes because I don't know what God's will is going to look like or what God's plan is for Sunday. And when we're living from shoulds and shouldn'ts, we say, I'm not interested in God's plan. I'm interested in my plan, which is really God's plan, but it's God's plan with inserted in it, you living from this is how life is going to be.
Right.
And so then on Sunday, what happens is you do your taxes because you said you were going to do your taxes. Whereas if you say, well, I'll write it in my diary in light pencil, do taxes, with the knowing that if you wake up in the morning and you really don't feel like doing the taxes, you say, oh, this, maybe I'll do it on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Saturday or next Sunday. And it can be as simple as trusting a little bit because we might think, well, if I don't say I'm going to do it on Sunday and do it on Sunday, it'll never get done. And the whole thing that we start to realize is, no, that's not exactly how it works. Is we can say like, oh, I don't feel like doing the dishes. It's late. We had a late dinner. I just want to go to sleep. And we might say, oh, the dishes and mowing the lawn. I don't feel like mowing the lawn today. And then tomorrow you wake up and you go, oh, I'm going to mow the lawn now. Right. And you'll find that yesterday you didn't feel like it, but you would have done it if you stuck to your rigid, this is how I should live life today. Whereas I'm saying, if you don't feel like doing it, don't do it. And my experience is you'll find that the next day or the day after, there'll be a feeling that says, oh, now I'll do the lawn. And so I found that you really don't need to structure things too much, because biologically, you'll know what's important. And at a certain point, it'll come up and feel like I feel like doing it. So if you go out for a walk on Sunday instead of doing your taxes, you might find that they get done on Wednesday.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm starting to sort of become more sensitive to those things. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I could go on. I could ask questions all day long, but thanks. Thank you. I'll save that for another time.
Okay. Well, I'll say bye to you, but I will answer one more question, and that is sometimes in relation to this pleasure and pain, or doing what you feel like. Sometimes we just don't believe there is an alternative, and so your question about going to work, where you say, well, if I did what I feel like, I wouldn't work, and so I am going to go to work because I don't want the consequence of no money. And it's sort of that's not just pain, it's sort of it wouldn't work. I do need to go to work. And so one of the nuances, tips in this is that we often think that life can only look this one way. And so doing what you feel like means you'll start to feel like, I really don't feel like doing this work, if you start feeling. And so my suggestion then is, okay, is it possible to be open to the fact that you can quit the job, or you can start looking for another job because you don't feel like it? So not doing it doesn't mean don't do it and get sacked and have no job and no reference and whatever, but maybe it just says, could I be doing something different with my life? And just opening up to the fact that maybe my life doesn't have to look like this just because this is what I studied at university, or this is what my parents wanted me to do.
Right.
So doing what we feel like might actually go, I don't feel like doing what I studied. I don't feel like doing what my friends and society are happy with me doing. And having the courage, which isn't really courage, it develops into, this is what I want to do. But it's a movement from, let's say, not being open to looking at, are there other alternatives, to being open to know what my life needs to look like.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's more of a sort of failure of imagination, I guess, or being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
That's
that
it.
makes a lot of sense. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're welcome. Hello, Schumann.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear
Got
me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. No. My question is, a lot of what you say, it is been of great benefit to me. And even yesterday, I noticed some suffering came out. But what I've noticed, it's going against a lot of conditioning which started in childhood. You know, some of the suffering, their habits. But I even remember creating them from childhood. But my question is what you were talking about today, the difference between discernment and judgment. For a long time, I've had an interest in the Australian Aborigines, and I'm aware of. It makes me feel sad, you know, some of the way, from my perception, is the way they've been marginalized and treated, like they do represent a high percentage of the prison population. And I think in the 1940s, they even dropped an atomic bomb on their land without telling them. The British, American, and Australian governments were involved in that. But yes, I think my question is, because it makes sense also what you say, in that everything is perfect and everything is God's will, whereas maybe just even a few weeks ago, I'd feel like, oh, it's really terrible, you know, what happened to them, because it's just also the disrespect, you know, not truly acknowledging their culture. But what still comes up for me is, I mean, I don't want to go on for too long, but one way that it makes sense to me is that there's a myth by the Gnostics, which basically said that according to the fairy tale, the planet Earth is a goddess. And the reason for this, and usually with creation, it takes a male and female energies to create. But what the Sophia, the goddess, did was she made this creation, but all by herself. It was just the female principle. And that's why there's a flaw in this existence. And that's why there's suffering. That's why there's death. That's why there's duality. And that, in some way, that's how I explained the injustices. I just thought, you know, that's the flaw in the beauty, whereas the true reality is beyond that, you know, not in this material world, because then I feel that there's no need to react to you know, because I think it's just human nature to feel bad when people are badly treated. But I mean, I know it's just intellectual, and the true understanding has to go beyond the intellect. But is this correct? I mean, because otherwise it's suffering. If I see, you know, if you see the injustices that people have to go through, I've just given the example of the Australian Aborigines, but this can be applied to many, many peoples around the world. I mean, is this true? Is this just part of the flaw in existence?
I think you might turn your volume down because I've got reverberation. Oh, no, now
yes.
it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if that way of seeing, if that sort of imagination, I guess, or not imagination, but visualization of life with that description, if that helps cut off the suffering, then it's definitely useful. But like most teaching concepts, it will need to fall away, and usually it will fall away because it gets replaced by something that is closer to reality, or rather closer to what is here in front of us. So at the end of, or the process is a process of bringing us more and more into practical daily living. And so if our visualization of life, is the goddess Sophia, and in the end, I guess you'd have to say that's not very practical. We can't, it's more of a theory, it's more of a story. Not to say it's not valid or valuable, but I'll just give you the description that I would put forward. And that is that the word perfect doesn't mean good, or perfect in some dualistic perfection. Because as you say, there are a lot of injustices that happen in life, a lot of pain. Humanity is very cruel. And emotionally, there should be a reaction to the pain in life. So in this teaching, it says, look, that life is duality, which means interconnected opposites making up the whole. Life is pleasure and pain, good and bad, wealth and poverty, health and disease. And you can't have one without the other in life. Life is duality. And so if we can come to see that this whole, the whole that is here, the manifestation that is here, is by its nature duality. And then that means that by seeing the whole as being made up of interconnected opposites, meaning it's a non-dual duality, that doesn't turn pain into pleasure, and it doesn't turn pleasure into pain. Pain is pain and pleasure is pleasure. But attitudinally, we can understand that they are valid components of the whole. And that view, if our attachment to outcome falls away, means we will still be able to acknowledge the injustices that have happened. We will still be able to support positive change and put our vote behind that, knowing that the outcome's not in our control. And yet simultaneously understand that life is unfolding exactly as it's created to unfold, which means including injustices, and hopefully those injustices being improved as time goes on. And that to me is a view of life that is not disconnected from practical daily living. It's an assessment of practical daily living. And it allows you to be inclusive of everything, because our attitude is now saying life is pleasure and pain. So even very unfortunate things like terrorist attacks that are going to deliver immense sadness and pain on a circumstantial level are valid and understandable within life if we have the understanding of life as being interconnected opposites with extremes. So extreme kindness and extreme unkindness. extreme pleasure, extreme pain. So if that becomes our understanding of life, then when life turns out that way, we say it's not nice. If it's not nice, it's not nice, but that's life. And internally, we can have the biological reaction of pain to something that is not nice, a biological reaction of sadness, and yet attitudinally, a non-resistance to life on an attitudinal level. But that's not something that we can impose or bring about. That's something that life brings about. So the change of being reactive to the injustice, for example, or being being in resistance to the injustice when it happens, or when we look back and see history full of injustice, that falls away if life changes us. And so these descriptions hopefully are part of us looking at life, and maybe we find, oh, I'm looking at it a little differently. Now, I'm sure you can see some parallels in what I'm saying. The notion of life being female energy only, and therefore, but they're not all parallels. There's some parts there that sort of suggest that life shouldn't be duality. It's almost suggesting that duality is an error. And in this teaching, we say, no, duality isn't the error. Duality is this manifestation. There might be other manifestations where there's no duality, but this manifestation is a manifestation of duality. The error, in a sense, is our attitude that says it shouldn't be duality, because that's an attitude that is fighting the very nature of life.
I see. Yeah, thank you. Yes. So yeah, attitude. Yes, because that's how I interpret it. My attitude is that there's an error in duality. Yes, that is there, and that's why there's the movement that that I should be more in touch with the formless, which is not being practical, because then I see. And it's not practical, but I see as this world is an illusion, but my true nature, my true home is somewhere else. That's the feeling I sometimes get in meditation.
Right.
But yes, as you say, not to be in resistance to what is. Yeah.
That's right. If you want to explore some other satsangs that talk about the two dimensions of life, which includes the quantum dimension or the formless dimension, which is where one part, a very significant, the human formless and this quantum dimension, and at the same time, the form is a complementary and is one with, is the other half, let's say, of the formless. And so we need to be able to integrate the two where we're not making one wrong and the other right. So we do need to rest in our being, rest in the formless, but not at the resistance and the cost of the form. So it's bringing the two together. So if you go back on Facebook, I don't know if you listened to yesterday's satsang, but there was a bit of that in yesterday's satsang. And then there's one on YouTube from a few weeks ago called The Quantumness of Life, I think, which which ties in with what you're talking about.
Yes. Thank you very much. And your talks have helped a lot. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter, for dropping in. You're welcome.
Bye.
Goodbye. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Roger. My apologies. Huh?
I said hello. Hello.
Yes, I'm apologizing because I'm about to ask. I'm about to ask a question that I don't know what the question is, because it's an accumulation over the past few weeks, mostly sparked by the daily live and as sparked by awakening in the middle of the night. So I think I'm just going to kind of put out a few thoughts and hope you hang in there. And then, I don't know, I imagine you may hear a question and go from there. So for example, before I fell asleep last night, I listened to a talk that occurred somewhere in the past week. And I woke later with the question, when you say I, and I'm not asking you to answer this yet, but when you say I, and even I, what is the difference between the layer that is the body-mind organism and the layer that is the silent awareness, and that which is not a layer, but we might reference as source? And as I was with this question, something just happened, barely visible in the morning light of the room. I looked and it just, it was like an intuitive glimpse of what is the nature of illusion, that it's an illusion to no one, not even to a witness. It was as if there was just this moment glimpse of being present with nothingness and yet something. And how the experience of adding anything more than that which presents here and now is not a doing, not even what's happening, but can be just as accurately stated as being as spontaneous as blinking. So I closed my eyes and I said, with my eyes closed, what was being experienced, this is all there is. The mind's eye may now project appearances. You know, I'm in the room, I'm in the bed, whatever it thought it saw. And that's no different, though I don't hear much talk about that, than this notion of how we say naming things, how naming things can be an interference. I was saying, well, observing things can also be an interference with knowing the paradoxical movement. And though that's a good place to stop, I got to add a few other pieces. A group was talking about surrender, and I just couldn't live with a debate about whether it's a surrender to, a surrender with, a surrender in. It's just acceptance. It seemed as though, number one, surrender is not a fixed commodity. But I couldn't go further. So one thought was just in asking that of you. And there's another part, but I think I should stop there for the moment. Is there a question there?
Well, surrender is sort of something that we don't do surrender, we get surrendered. So if we go around thinking surrender is a verb that the doer has to do, then there's a problem, because the doer will want to surrender, and that is the opposite of surrendering. So just wanting to surrender is actually, not, it isn't surrendering, it's the opposite. So surrendering happens essentially when there's a flash, an insight, a realization, I can't do this. Often because we've been trying so hard, and not getting anywhere. Maybe because we just keep getting flattened by suffering, and we see that we're trying to, as a doer towards the end of suffering, and it just keeps coming in on us. And as soon as we feel like we've got any air and we might be getting somewhere, we realize we get dunked underwater again, and realize that no matter how much effort we put in, the suffering is not something I'm doing and not something I can get out of. And so it could equate to, us trying to lift a mountain. Like we really somehow think we can lift a mountain, or lift, I don't know, a bar, and we're putting all our effort into it, trying to lift this bar. And at some point, we might just realize the bar is connected to the mountain. I can't lift this bar. And so surrender, where we just stop. It's like, I think I think I can do it. I think I can do it. And at some point we go, I can't do it. It's not because I'm failing, but it's because it's not something I can do. It's not a possibility. And so a surrendering happens where we just stop. And what stops is the thinking mind, the attachment to outcomes, the doership, that thinks it can make life happen, thinks it's a doer. And in a flash, it can, I simply cannot do this. And I've been trying to do it. And we might see that trying to do it is actually more layers of what we're actually trying to get away from. And, me describing it isn't even going to be anywhere near appropriate, because the doer is going to try to do surrender anyway. It's appropriate if in a moment, what I happen to say hits someone in that moment, just in the way that is, appropriate to bring about surrendering. And I expect that for the most part, it won't do that, because if it did, I'd just talk about surrender and that would be it. Everyone would get surrendered. And it just, hopefully you contemplate this. That's when I hear you saying that this contemplating is happening, that's fantastic, because you are going to have these glimpses just because of a thought that arises, which will give it an insight, a glimpse. You didn't make it happen. Just the thought arose in just the right way. And the topic of surrendering, if we speak about it, can, as we contemplate it more and more, maybe arise in a way where we get surrendered. But it's definitely not something that, we do. It's sort of like life gets us to put the sword down. We don't even put the sword down, but the sword does get put down. So that's a little bit about surrender. As for your other topic, to me, the I is referring to the self, or the essence, the spirit, the consciousness, the awareness, whatever words you want to use. The I, so that's the I in Ramana's teaching. The I in Ramana's teaching is referring to the doer, the person that isn't connected to them, doesn't realize their depth. And is essentially this psychological movement of doership and attachment to outcome. So that false self is covering up the true self, the I. And in that teaching, the I essentially dissolves. So that would equate to the doership and attachment to outcome dissolving. What's left is not just the I, but the human being. What's left is not just the I, but rather the human being. But in order for the human being in its integrated form to exist, not only does the small self, or the what is referred to as the single I, need to fall away, but the I, beingness, the spirit, needs to be appreciated and recognized. And that can happen in many different methodologies or different ways. As I spoke about yesterday, you could go through Waterloo Station or Paddington Station. They're not the same station. The experiences that happen are different. And one of the ways that the integrated living as a human happens is where a teaching is just pointing at the essence and saying what you are is the self, the essence, the absolute. You are not the body. And essentially there can be a waking up to that essence, which can sort of happen as the small self is dissolving. And then in time, there will be an integration of that I realization. However it happens, it doesn't have to be as extreme as just knowing yourself as formless awareness. And in time, it integrates in where the human being knows that depth to themselves. So I think your question was, what is the difference between the I, and the source? And so I would say I is the small self, the psychological doership and attachment that when it's present covers up the I. The I is referring to just the essence. And eventually that knowing of I will exist as a knowing of the human being, both the body and the consciousness in an integrated form, where the small self, which is the doership and attachment attitude, is not present.
Super. I got to throw one more on top of that. Okay. From your perspective, from your memory of your past take of a particular teaching, I'm going to summarize with 3 words, but not just the obvious. Well, that's a top-down teaching, which is useful in dislodging and let it go. Which, okay, I'll accept that as well, but it's been swimming around for a while, the 3 words, as a teaching, nothing ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just asking what that's ever meant to you, as well as in perspective to this teaching.
Okay, nothing ever happened is really pointing to the absence of experience. It's which we can't know the absence of experience, because the absence of experience means the absence of awareness. And we might, for a while, have an idea that that's what it's all about, to know the absolute nothing. So in this teaching, we would say consciousness at rest, the unmanifest, is infinite creative potentiality. And at some point, that infinite creative potentiality, which is really absolute nothing, but not dead nothing, potential nothing, At some point, it has to actualize, it has to manifest, has to turn into form. That's because it is potentiality, not dead, but potential. If it was dead nothing, then it would never actualize. But because it's potential nothing, it turns into everything, which is the manifestation. And in this case, we can say space and time and duality. And in theory, you would say, well, the manifestation will then at some point, or consciousness, which is originally consciousness at rest, becomes consciousness in movement, and will return to consciousness at rest. Consciousness at rest, the unmanifest, is absolute nothing. So absolute nothing becomes returns to absolute nothing. You started with nothing, you end with nothing, so nothing ever happened. Because if you start with absolute nothing, and then there was something, you can't end up with absolute nothing, because nothing plus something is something. So if we have absolute nothing becomes everything and returns back to absolute nothing, what it's really saying is that the something is really nothing. And so nothing ever happened. Now, how do we reconcile that when we are part of the everything, part of the something? And we might start to get a hint of that if we start paying attention to deep sleep, not while we're in deep sleep, but even just the theory of deep sleep, where or start paying attention to the waking state. And the waking state is presence. The presence of presence, if you would go to Wei Wu Wei's teaching. And so Wei Wu Wei's teaching and this topic for me were very significant. So Wei Wu Wei would say, life, the waking state, which Ramana always also refers to, the waking state, is the presence of presence. Then we can have the presence of absence, which would basically the present of absence means waking state as we know it. It's more like a meditation state where the world of form collapses and there is maybe just awareness. And we might think that that is nothing. But really, there's awareness of nothing. Now, if there's awareness of nothing, nothing is something. But it's different to the something that we know as daily living. So these in a meditation, there can be just awareness of what we would call nothing, but it's not really nothing. At very least, we can say awareness, aware of itself. Or awareness, so that refers to the awareness of absence or the presence of absence. So the first, which is waking state, is presence of presence. Then we have a meditation which has no daily living in it, but there's still awareness. So there's the presence of the absence of presence. Presence of absence, and then the nothing, the absolute nothing, is referred to as the absence of the presence of presence and the absence of the presence of absence, which is the complete negation of both the waking state and the meditation state that we might say is nothing. But so if we see that meditation state is not really absolute nothing, it's just the absence of form. And real nothing, or not real nothing, but the absolute nothing is the absence of both of those. Now, that can't really be known. How it can be known is if we become familiar with the presence of presence as an experience, so familiar with the waking state, being aware of presence, become familiar with the presence of absence, which is a very simple, basic meditation state where there is just I am or awareness and very little, no space, no time. There's just the void or emptiness or nothing, whatever. But there's awareness. And that essentially, you could say, is the most basic form of the manifestation. And if there is a recognition, oh, there is awareness here, and absolute nothing is the absence of even that awareness. That, to me, is where we realize that awareness, which is aware of nothing, which sort of seems like darkness, you might have a glimpse in a moment that the absence of even that is absolute nothing. And I think really Ramana is pointing to there. He says there is no creation, there is no dissolution, nothing ever happened. So he's even going beyond the notion I've put forward of the unmanifest becoming the manifest and then the manifest returning to the unmanifest. That is, the unmanifest becoming the manifest is creation, and the manifest going back to the unmanifest is dissolution. And so Ramana is saying, is going even beyond the notion of creation and dissolution and saying there is no creation, there is no dissolution, nothing ever happened, which is a pointing back to the very root of the source. And that's useful in a way as a theoretical understanding of source. And it's not just theoretical. You can have an intuitive sense of that when there is a glimpse in that meditation of, oh, that nothing is the absence of even this very basic awareness.
So my takeaway while listening is that nothing ever happened points to a feeling that to get stuck or grasp at anything is not it. It's
exactly.
We're talking something that beyond the beyond, beyond the beyond. And on the first conversation, I had an image similar to yours, but I just wanted to share the image that came to mind. I have the image more than I even remember the words that it describes, but that the action of the potential of surrendering is like, or even desiring surrender, maybe could be said, grabbing a hold of your bootstraps and lifting yourself off the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing that image, I can laugh at how incomprehensible that is.
That's exactly right. So when you clicks that all the doing is like that, there's a stopping that happens.
Not even who's doing this, but just finding it funny.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark.